Hello everyone, and welcome to the third chapter of the top 20 ways to draw the figure with Burne Hogarth. Before I start, I have to clarify that a lot of people may have a problem with his stylized method of drawing the body and muscles in a rounded type shading. Others will be turned off by the complexity of his method. I had to draw everything you see here twice, just because I missed some key element in his method. So it's not an easy method to comprehend. But I'm not going to discuss his shading techniques or his stylized drawing here, but rather his concepts and principles of drawing the figure, which I think they are very important for drawing the figure from your imagination. They consist of 11 principles of foreshortening and 3 helping aid tools to maintain the perfect body gestures and poses. I find that Burne Hogarth's method is usually misunderstood for his stylized techniques, but once you dig deep behind that, you will find out that his method is a major pillar in the understanding of the figure and how to draw it from your imagination. With that said, let's start with his method, starting with the proportions. Now, Burne Hogarth's proportions are different both in length and width than the previous two methods. The body, in his opinion, is divided into 8 3/4 of a head in length and 3 heads in width. The length divisions are the chin, the pecs, the navel, the pubic arch, the knees, and the ankles, leaving the last 3/4 for the feet. The shoulders are half a head down from the chin to the pit of the neck. The torso, which is the rib cage and the pelvis and the connection between them, from the front is 3 heads high, from the shoulder to the pubic arch, divided into the pix mark, the navel mark, and the pubic arch mark. From the back, it's 3.5 heads high, from the shoulder to the buttocks, divided into the shoulder blade mark, the external obliques mark, the base of the spine mark, and finally, the last half of the head is the mark for the bottom of the buttock. The arms are 2 3/4 of head long, from the acromion process to the wrist, and the hands are 3/4 of a head long, from the wrist to the tip of the fingers, resulting in a 3.5 head long arms, from the shoulders to the tip of the fingers. So the hands are 3/4 head long and 1/4 of a head wide. The elbow is at the navel mark and the wrist is at the crotch mark. The legs are 4 heads high, from the thigh bone to the ankles. The feet are 1/4 of a head high, from the ankle to the sole of the foot, resulting in a 4.25 of a head long legs, from the thigh bones to the floor. The feet length are as long as the forearms, which is 1.33 of a head long, from the back of the foot to the tips of the toes, and it's 1/2 of a head wide. This concludes the proportions. Next we will discuss the forms of the figure, starting with the head. The head is basically 2 parts, the cranium sphere with the bottom cut out, and a boxy facial wedge inserted into the sphere. The rib cage is a barrel-shaped object with 2 horseshoe-shaped passages opposing each other, one for the clavicles and the other for the diaphragm arch. A cylindrical neck inserted in the triangular-shaped hole in the top of the rib cage. The diaphragm arch opening give way to the abdominal mass under it, and a navel on top of the third section of the abdominal muscles. The nipples are at the 45 degrees angle of the center line on both sides. So if there is a center line of the body, from the pit of the neck to the nipples are 45 degrees, and they make a 90 degrees angle between them. The nipples are above the corner of the breast in the male figure and in the center in the female figure. The deltoid, by the way, is considered a part of the torso when the arms are down, but when they are raised up, they become a part of the arms, exposing a barrel-like shape under it. As for the pelvis is a wedge-shaped box, and it's the second largest mass of the body after the ribcage. It's narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. While the ribcage is tipped backward, the pelvis is tipped forward. Of course, these proportions are in ideal pose, but it can change depending on the pose and the situation they are in. The buttocks, the obliques, have this butterfly shape, consisting of 2 parts on either side, resulting in this kidney-shaped mass of the overall torso that moves and twists depending on the pose of the figure. Of course, this will lead us to the peanut-shaped method later on in this series. The arms and the legs are two parts, modified cones and cylinder attached together. Both the arms and the legs are mounted on by a large mass of muscles, the deltoid in the arms and the gluteus for the legs. Both parts have rotating joints, shoulder for the arm, the hips for the legs. Both have a bending joint, like the elbow in the arms and the knees in the legs. Both have tapered end joint, like a wrist in the arms and the ankle for the legs. And finally, both have end-terminal part, like hands in the arms and feet on the legs. The arms can be represented by two arcs, one from the shoulder to the elbow and the other from the elbow to the wrist. It's the same arc for all situations. As for the legs, the arcs have different shapes based on the situation. So when the ankle bone is seen outside the leg outline, as in contributing to the contour of the leg curve is a big curved shape with two hills from the outside of the leg and a straight line from the inside. Unless the knee is bent, then the straight line will be broken into two straight lines. When the ankle bone is seen inside the leg outline, as in inside the contour of the leg curve is an S-shaped curve, changing direction at the point of the knee. As for the hands are a flat-shaped box with the fingers being some sort of a ball and a rod shape. The feet are a triangular-shaped wedge, with the toes being the same as the fingers, as a shorter ball and a rod shape. Creating the forms of the figure, based on effect, motion, and volume. The order of the forms according to Burne Hogarth is no longer starting with the head, as with other methods. The new order of the figure should be as follows: the rib cage, first, the pelvis, second, the connection between them, which will finish up the torso as a whole. Then we do the legs, the arms, and finally comes the head. The reason why we start with the torso is because the torso mass is the central form which all other forms attach to. When the torso moves, the rest will follow. So that's why we start with the torso and the center line first. Then we go to the legs. The reason behind that is because whatever action the figure takes, it's mostly related to the ground floor plane. The legs work together against gravity, expressing weight, pressure, and tension. The figure needs the legs' support to sustain the action it's doing. After that comes the arms. Now the arms movement is important to represent the final motion, but they don't affect the major shift of the torso and legs. That's why they come in third on the importance scale. The arms attach to the collarbones, and thus the motion affect the arms is minimal to the torso and the legs. At the last step comes the head, because there is no change to the torso, legs, and arms done when the head move. Thus it comes last in this figure arrangement. Now with this arrangement, we create our figure drawing step by step the same way: the torso, the leg gesture, the arms, the heads, then we do the basic shapes, and finally the details. Now let's dive into the main part of Burne Hogarth method. The 11 Principles of Foreshortening. Now these principles are taken from his Dynamic Anatomy and Dynamic Figure drawing books. These principles are used to unify the figure in space. They can be studied as ways to make sure the figures can be drawn correctly in the foreshortened state without the need of a reference, so from imagination or memory. So let's start with the first one: overlapping. When one form is placed over another, cutting some of the form behind it, it creates the illusion of depth. These overlapping shapes depend on the perspective to arrange which is in front and which is back. The angle of view also plays a role in deciding which form is on top of the other, and what side of it will show up or down, and which will make it in the final outline. Now it may seem disjointed and separated to put isolated form in front of each other, so that's why we have to hold them together with different lines and techniques, which we're going to be discussing in the upcoming principles. The second principle is the interconnection lines. Think of interconnection lines like the lines on the piece of fabric after being pulled to one side. It creates this interconnection line between the joints that is hanging from. Same effect here. The interconnection lines show up mostly at the joints that are fusing two body parts together, like the knees, elbows, knuckles, hips, ankles, and so on. These interconnection lines bind the two parts together, fusing their outline into one object. They depend on perspective and the angle of view, like we said in the previous part. If the object is closer to the angle of view, either low angle or high angle, it becomes dominant, and the interconnections line will come out from this dominant part of the body and invade the subordinate body part connecting the two parts together. For example, here the closer part to the angle view is the pelvis, and its line invade the ribcage area, fusing the two together. Same with the leg here. It also can happen on a small scale, like the feet or the fingers. You have to understand that each part of the body isn't separated. They all connect together, and it has to be seen this way. Except of course in the case of extreme foreshortening, where they are on top of each other, eclipsing each other almost completely. We will talk about this in the later chapter. The third principle is the outline and contour. The outline of the body is controlled by the end of the form edge. For example, here the back muscles control the body form on the right, shaping the final outline. Same thing with the knees here, but the knee is inside the outline of the body. So without emphasizing the knee area, it can sink in the total outline and completely be lost. So we need to show it as a different part of the torso, and we do that by outlining and emphasizing the contour line. So highlighting the frontal edges of the knee with a thicker line weight separated from the background part, and the same goes for any part of the leg that is sharing an outline with the torso. We can use the interconnection lines we talked about previously to guide our thicker lines. As you can see here, with a thicker outline in the front and a thinner outline in the back, you can tell which body part is in front and which body part is going into the background. This way you can lead the viewer to look at the part you want him to look at first, then go one by one toward the background. The fourth principle is the tonal gradation. It's used to balance the outlining effect by adding more weight to the dominant side, sending it forward and the rest backward, and guiding the viewer toward your focal point. It's done by adding light to the dominant side and shadows to the subordinate side, sending it toward the background. The three previous principles are used to join the separation done by the overlapping parts to make it into one whole object. The fifth principle is the constant width factor. In this concept, Burne Hogarth explained that the width of some of the body parts equal each other no matter what the pose or the perspective is. This will help you check your own drawing and correct misjudging the body part's width by comparing it to other parts. For example, the width of the thigh muscle group at its midpoint is equal to the width of the calf muscle in the lower leg. Also, the width of the lower arm muscle group is equal to the width of the upper arm muscle group. See, the length may vary between these groups, but the width is constant and will always be the same no matter what the perspective is. If a person sat down on his feet bending at the knee, we can line up the calf muscles with the thigh muscles and they will be exactly the same width. Same with the arms. We can use the same concept with the fingers, by the way, but the width of the finger joint goes down by a quarter of a distance with each joint. So if we take the first joint of the knuckles and went down to the other joints, they will have a 3/4 of the width of the joint before it. It's like it's tapering off, with a smaller width for each joint. You can use this to check on your work when you're drawing the hands. Principle number 6. Using perspective ellipses in foreshortening. The length factor. Now we saw that the width of some body parts are equal to each other, but the length can vary. So in order to check out the length factor, we go to another concept, which is using the perspective ellipses. If we take the arms for example and set the base point at the shoulder and the next at the elbow, and finally the rest at the third point, and rotate the arm all around, the points of the elbow and the wrist will create an ellipse centered at the shoulder joint. But in case the lower arm is bent, we go up a point to the other joint. So we go to the elbow joint to find the placement of the wrist, by drawing an ellipse of that joint based on the shoulder as well. As for the legs, the center will be the pelvis joint, but when we rotate the leg, the center will move slightly due to the bone having a little neck at the thigh bone, which will make the center move a little bit. So it won't be a constant center like the shoulder. It will move up and down and left and right a little bit. With these perspective ellipses, you can guess where the arms and legs will be if you are animating a figure or drawing the next pose while moving the legs and arms around, without the need of a reference. The seventh principle is interlacing the joints. This concept depends on the perspective and the view angle of the body. Joints always go to the advancing body part attached to them, so they have two conditions. It's either given to the advanced part or taken from the receding part. For example, if the lower leg is advancing, as in closer to the view angle and is a low view angle, the knee will be given to the lower leg. If the lower leg is receding to the background and is a high view angle, the knee will be given to the upper leg. What it means to be given or taken is that it will be included in the outline for the lower or higher part of the body. Same thing goes to the elbow. If the upper arm is advancing and the lower arm is receding to the background, the elbow will be given to the upper arm outline, and vice versa. Same thing with the knuckles and fingers. But in the fingers there are two joints for each body part, so the same part can either be taken from one side and given from the other, or even taking the two joints altogether. The eighth principle is the isosceles method, joints pre-placement. This concept is used to check the foreshortening state of the legs only, due to the fact that the upper leg length is equal to the lower leg, while the lower arm is a bit longer than the upper arm, so this method will not work there. We know that the length of the leg parts are equal. If we sat down on our foot, the thigh bone and the ankle bone will align on top of each other. So we know that the distance between the thigh bone to the knee is equal to the distance from the knee to the ankle. So we can draw an isosceles triangle with two equal parts edges, being the edges are the lower and higher leg parts, and the third edge varies depending on the placement of the leg. This way you can check out the length of your leg in any pose, knowing that they should be equal in length no matter what the pose and the perspective is. The ninth principle is the projecting the side view of the figure. This concept can be added also to the helping method later on, but for now it can be used to figure out the foreshortened or the three-quarter view by using the side view of the figure as a projection. If we made these three lines with different views, then cut them into thirds, we can see that the horizontal line cuts all three lines at 3 equal thirds. You can measure between the three parts yourself and see that the horizontal line cut them exactly into 3 equal thirds, even if the view of them are different or in different perspective. If we use the same concept for the head, for example, we can use the side view of the head to determine the correct placement of the facial features by projecting the side view with horizontal lines to draw the other views. So we can also apply this method to the figure as a whole. Not only we can project each body placement, but also the perspective ellipses that we used before can also be projected as well. The 10th principle is the reversible figure projection. The reversible concept is based on the fact that if you looked at the body from the front and the back, the outline of the body should be the same. So without the details on the inner body parts, the outline should be exactly the same. The same goes to the left view or the right view. Any two 180 degrees apart views should be the same. We can use this method to help us draw the other views of the body by using a reversible projection. It will make it easier for us to deal with the inner lines only, while the outline is determined from the reversible pose that we already have. The last principle of the foreshortening is the perspective projection of the figure. The same way we project the side view or the reversible view, we can also project the perspective of the figure that we already draw to draw other objects in the scene or even other figures. After we draw the figure, we can relate the drawn figure to its ground plane. Using the initial perspective lines we used to draw the body planes correctly, we can use them to draw the rest of the scene using the same perspective. We can use it to draw objects around the figure or other figures or the entire scene from the first figure perspective. This concludes the 11 principles of the foreshortening, and now let's explore the 3 different methods to help us create the figure in space. The first method is the phase sequence projection, or the multiple action figure. The first aiding device is the phase sequence projection method. It's used to search other option or situation for the existing pose, exploring other options before committing to the final design. It's also a searching device which leaves the figure open and uncommitted. So rather than starting a new pose, you draw other options on top of the current pose you already drawn. This way you reach the final pose through exploring all other options in a quick and efficient way. As we can see here from these examples, you can reach multiple poses in just few additions. So you can use the blue leg pose with the black, or the red hand with the blue, or the red with the black. So you have multiple options made by exploring the pose a bit deeper till you finally commit to the final choice. It doesn't have to stop here at the legs or the arms. You can also add the lower half of the body in different position or the upper half, giving you even wider ranges. For example, you can change the lower half and then change a leg in the lower half, adding more micro transitions of the same pose, leaving you with as many options as you want to choose from. The second aiding method is the multiple action figure but for the hands. You can do the same thing with even smaller body parts like the hands. You can have as many levels as you want to one option, going from big to small. You can change the hand pose or the fingers or joint by joint option to explore as many options as you can imagine. The final helping method is the shin thrust leads the body action. The final aiding method is using the shin location to know where the body action is. Body actions tend to follow the direction of the chin. If the chin is drawn inward toward the neck, the body tends to go backward with it. If the chin is thrusting outward, the body will project along with it forward. As you can see here, when the chin is going back, the body follows, and when it goes forward, the body follows as well. This concludes the principle and the helping method of Burne Hogarth. These principles are really important for drawing from imagination. Even if you don't want to follow the way Burne Hogarth drew these principles, you can apply them not only for the figure but for everything else as well. Just remember that these are complicated methods and need a lot of practice to master, so keep that in mind. Now let's go to the pros and cons of this method. As for the pros, it's the best method to tackle foreshortening and figure invention with such deep analysis. It has the correct anatomy under the surface. The correct anatomy results in a very dynamic and expressive figure. The foreshortening principle, if applied correctly, are a great help for drawing anything from imagination, not just the figure. As for the cons, it's a very complicated method, and having a hard to follow book doesn't make it easier. It's not a method for beginners. Hogarth's stylized spherical shading techniques muddy the correct anatomy underneath it and exaggerate the figure. Both male and female look like bodybuilders do the stylized shading, and it also needs a lot of practice to master. With that said, let's see how Burne Hogarth drew the figure from start to finish. Well, I'm not gonna finish them the same way he does with the stylized shading, but let's study the way he starts the figure. First, we start off with the biggest mass all the way to the smallest, starting with the ribcage as a barrel, then the pelvis as a wedged box. After that, we draw the center line, then the connection between the ribcage and the pelvis. Next, we draw the legs, paying attention to the ankle position. You can see that both legs have the ankle on the outside of the outline, so both of them will be represented by a B-shaped curve. Then we draw the arms as two curves, and finally the last mass, which is the head, and this will conclude the first draft of the figure. The second step is to draw the basic shapes of the masses. The torso as a bean shape, the arms as two cylinders with the joints as boxes or spheres, then the legs, which also are two cylinders, and the knees as a box. Finally, we add the details while observing the reference photo. Make sure you include all the interconnection lines between the shapes to unify the body as one mass. And here are all the steps side by side. Now let's do two more examples using the same method. The rib cage, then the pelvis and center line, the connection between them. One of the legs has the ankle inside and one has it outside, so one have a B-shaped curve and the other have an S curve. Next, the arms, and finally the head. Next, the basic shape layer. And finally, the detailed layer. And we will do the same for the female figure. Now for this chapter I'm not gonna talk about the anatomy, but how we can use the 11 principles we talked about to invent a figure from imagination, using the concepts we studied before. On the left you can see all the concepts and the helping aid we studied, so let's see how we can implement them on a drawing. We start the same way we did before with the rib cage, center line, pelvis, and the connection between them. For the legs, you can see I'm using the length factor and the isosceles method, as the upper legs has the equal length to the lower leg. Also, I'm doing the curves of the legs by placing the ankles inside the outline, so they can be an S-curve shape. For the arms, I'm using the perspective ellipses to figure out the placement of the elbow compared to the navel, since they are on the same level. So when they rotate, they create a perspective ellipse. So with the perspective ellipse, we can place both elbows on the same line with the navel, aligning them to the navel. Then we draw the head, and we have our first draft. We add the bean shape for the torso. And I check out the width of the upper legs by using the constant width factor to the lower leg. They are equal in width, so that it will make it easier to place the outline, and I will do the same for the arms. Now I add the details, finally, based on my knowledge on anatomy, and using the overlapping intersection lines and the outlining concept we studied. And now we have a pose done completely from imagination. Now let's use some of the Hogarth aid methods that we studied, which is the phase sequence projection, to add more variety and explore more options for this pose. I added 2 more arms and 2 more legs for the pose, and we have a second pose done very quickly and easily. That's how easy he makes creating a pose from imagination is. This is why his method is very important not only for the 11th concepts but the variety you can get using the phase sequence projection method. Now let's do some quick 3-minute pauses. When you have only 3 minutes, you can use this initial draft step to quickly figure out the motion and direction of the torso and the limbs under 3 minutes. We draw the rib cage, the center line, the pelvis, the leg curves based on the ankle position, the arms, and finally the head. Quick and easy. And we will do the same for the rest of the poses. Now let's take a bit more time on these next 2 poses, about 20 minutes each. In this chapter, take your time while doing these poses. 20 minutes is a long time to finish up a pose in a clean and orderly way. Instead of doing these 2 with the reference, I decided to do them from memory instead. This way it will give me a chance to show you how to apply these 11 concepts while drawing without a reference, but in a faster way. So before I start drawing, I first try to memorize the most important aspect of this pose: the center line, the leg curve type, the position and the movement of the arms, the shape of the head, the torso and the rib cage. And now let's hide the reference and draw it from memory. Drawing from memory exercise will help you a lot on your figure drawing techniques. It's always good to draw from a photo, but when you draw it from memory, you have more focus on solving the figure drawing issues rather than copying a photo. Okay, let's start with the rib cage, the center line, the pelvis, the shape of the leg curve. I'm using the isosceles method to figure the length of the leg and the perspective ellipsis to figure out the placement of the elbow. And here we are, we have the first draft already. For the second pass, we draw the basic shapes, a bean shape for the torso. As for the legs and the arms, I'm using the constant width factor to determine the width of the legs and arm compared to the upper and lower parts. Now that we have the pose ready, let's add the details. And we are done. A pose from memory that look alike the original pose using the 11th Principles of Foreshortening. Let's do the same with the female figure. Study the important motion of the figure before hiding the image, then draw it from memory using the same techniques. And it's done. Let's draw the 1 hour figure using the shading techniques Hogarth did in his book, just for this pose. With this pose, take your time. 1 hour is a long time to do a figure pose. Start the same way this time, observing the model in the reference, not from memory. Do all the steps and add the details afterward. Now before I add the shading, I use the face sequence method to add variety to the pose. It's always fun to do. This technique will enhance your figure drawing skills by inventing other poses from imagination. Okay, that was fun. Now let's add the shading on top of the first one. Hogarth's stylized shading is unique. Some people don't like it, others do. He over-exaggerates the muscles in both females and males with a direct frontal light source. But what I did here is use the way he shades his model, but with the top right light source instead of a frontal light, following the reference photo instead of his stylized way. I didn't exaggerate the muscles either, since the reference isn't for a bodybuilder. His shading is known for being smoothed out and very contrasted as well. Obviously, it needs more time to perfect his style. 1 hour isn't long enough for shading. It's long enough for posing, but not long enough for shading. But it looks okay, nonetheless. And here it is, all the steps and variation side by side. Now let's sit back and enjoy the last painting using all the knowledge we have from the Burne Hogarth method. Don't let this stylized technique turn you off reading his books, by the way. You will find out after reading it a couple of times that his principles are very essential for drawing from imagination. I hope you will reconsider reading his books again after watching this video. You won't regret it. Okay, and here is the final sheet. The Burne method was a big one. It took me almost a month to do, and I had to redo the drawings twice. But I learned a lot just doing it and rereading his books 3 times. Once you understand his concept, you will realize how important this method is. I have to be honest, I didn't quite get them before when I studied them for myself. But once I intended to teach them, the whole thing just clicked. That's why doing these tutorials are a great joy for me. Because I'm learning a lot, not just by practicing them on my own, but trying to explain something to others forces you to dig deeper and try to conceptualize and summarize the thing you are trying to explain. Hopefully I managed to present his method as easily as possible for you in this systematic and easy to follow step-by-step guide. Before I go, I would like to thank all the people who donated to my Patreon. Thank you so much for your generosity. If you would like to support me at Patreon, please go to patreon.com/rainwalker, link in the description. Thank you so much for all your help. Coming up next, I think you can tell where this is going, especially if you saw the other tutorial series. So next one will be, of course, Jack Ham. It will be fun and enjoyable session. For now, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.